What's going on, everybody? It's Jonathan Otero, and I am doing the Selling During Crisis podcast finale. And this time I have no guest. It is just us going to be hanging out here. So let me get set up, and I want to make sure that we have all of our things ready for you guys because I want to make sure that we are delivering to you. So let me first give you the kind of story of how this podcast all came about, and then I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've done, some of the things we talked about during the podcast, and I just wanted to spend one-on-one time with you guys right now. Whoever's watching, whoever has watched in the past, whoever follows me, whoever's seen the stuff that we've done on the podcast, just want to talk to you guys one-on-one and talk to you about what I've personally learned, what you've personally learned, and maybe we'll see where this kind of goes from there. But this podcast started as an idea. First, initially, I had this was the spinoff. The original podcast was called Leading During Crisis, where I interviewed IT practitioners, people who were, my buyers, essentially, to ask them what was going on when COVID hit last year, kind of take off my shoes, put their shoes on, and see what it was like from a buyer's perspective. And understand really what they were going through with everything that's going on, leading a team during crisis. Once that podcast finished and we did the finale, I wanted to always do a spinoff now and really highlight what the sellers were going through, because we were going through it as well. And I would see a lot of communication online and a lot of things that were going on, saying what was good and what was bad about people that was selling and being pushy and salesy and all the different things that we hear about. So what I ended up doing was I created this podcast, Selling During Crisis, where it was a spinoff, and we started in September. The idea started in September, but we didn't launch the first episode until November, because during COVID, there was a big major life change in my life. What changed was that I ended up losing my job with the company that I was with. And there was that period where I was kind of going through a lot of changes and a lot of different things. And so I went through that, and I still wanted to get back with you guys and kind of talk to you to see if I can add some value to my network and my community by leveraging the people in my network to talk about selling during this crazy time. And now that a lot of people are vaccinated now and we're going back to normal, masks can come off, which is great. Super excited. Selling is no more selling during crisis. Now we're kind of just going back to selling, which is great. So thank God for that. And so I wanted to just take a moment to just be with you guys and talk to you about some of the things that we learned. And so, we had a bunch of people on the podcast. Let me share my screen with you right now and talk to you about some of the highlights for me. Hopefully, as you guys are joining and hopping on to the lives on YouTube and LinkedIn, you guys can kind of share some of your best experiences and what you've learned as well. But I'll share my screen and show you here. So let me just pull that up. Give me a sec here. So here's my YouTube channel. And after every episode was done, I would upload the video to YouTube. And you can see here, we started with episode 1 was with a sales trainer that I knew personally when I was in New York, coming up as a baby rep, Jeff Goldberg. And Jeff talks a lot about the things that I'm really interested in terms of, how to communicate with people on a very, being humble and communicating with people at their level. And so Jeff was the one that I really wanted to kick off the podcast with, because as a sales trainer, even to this day, a lot of the things that he says are still relevant to me. A lot of the issues that I have with sales training in general is that it's not relevant as it kind of gets old and stale. And a lot of the things Jeff teaches, I still do today. And this was, him and I met back in like 2008. So you can see over the years, I still keep in touch with him as a sales trainer. And then we had a lot of other different folks on the podcast. Cristiana Montenegro we had on, because I've learned a lot during this time, selling during these crazy times where we've lost the ability to meet face to face. I've had to change who I was and change who I am. And a lot of the change came with using video to communicate And Vidyard is an application that I was really excited about. So I wanted to have an expert on Vidyard talk about that. That was on episode 2. We had Bryn Tillman, who's an expert in social selling when it comes to LinkedIn and how to leverage that. She's the CEO of of social selling, Social Sales Link. And I wanted to make sure that we had her on to talk about a topic. So I covered in the first 3 episodes here, I covered sales training, Vidyard video, how to use video to leverage and communicate, and how to use LinkedIn to prospect the network. And then I kept that going on episode 4 with Matt Fleming, who works at LinkedIn specifically. And he was the one who really taught me how to optimize my profile. And so that was really exciting. And then Steve Bookbinder, believe it or not, Steve Bookbinder, I met through Jeff Goldberg, who we had on episode 1. And Steve, interestingly enough, put the bug in my ear after we had our conversation. After this interview aired and we put it up on LinkedIn and YouTube, him and I had a conversation after, and he was the one who got me into sales training. And the reason why Digital Sales Sync, which is now the company that I have outside of what I do with Unity Fiber, Digital Sales Sync was born through a conversation with Steve Bookbinder. And he has a really great book and a really great topic that he talks about called echo selling. So you want to check out that episode on that. I had Jennifer Sargent, who is Jennifer is awesome when it comes to marketing. This whole conversation and this whole episode was just talking about marketing, how to market yourself and build your own brand and create brand awareness online. So I wanted to have that as well, because as we're talking about changing in this world, we want to make sure that we talk about brand building. You're building your own brand. And what ends up happening is once you have a brand built, no matter what happens afterwards, like in my example, in my situation, when I lost my job, you keep that brand with you. And so Jennifer and I had that conversation. Todd Capone, who is the founder of Sales Melon. And I mean, one of the most brilliant minds that I've ever met in sales. Another person that I met through Jeff Goldberg, based out of Chicago, wrote a book, and I'm going to talk about it later on, The Transparency Sale. And we had some conversations and really, really in-depth conversation about selling during this time, but also making sure that we don't water it down as salespeople. We had a conversation about the history of sales. So this was a really cool conversation that we had there. Adrienne Miller, who's also a sales trainer for over, I think it was 25, 30 years. She's been in the industry, and she gave a different perspective of seeing how the industry has changed. If you remember earlier, I talked about how I'm not a fan of how sometimes sales training can get stale. Well, Adrienne Miller will tell you how to avoid that. That was a great conversation there. Josh Feedy, who has his own podcast as well, the Sales Enablement Podcast. We talked about different conversations. He had me on his show. He was on my show. And Josh really came at it from a very, very modern, unique perspective that you guys want to check out. Joe Affelbaum as well, who is Mr. High Energy. I mean, you talk about being focused in the moment. Joe will talk to you about how to stay focused in the moment. He's written a bunch of books that have been published as well in the topic of sales and sales training. If you don't follow him on all the different social platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, all that good stuff, because this guy posts a lot of great motivational stuff. We then brought it to the sales level where we actually talked about salespeople who are selling right now during this time with Lou Mendez, who was a counterpart of mine, a peer of mine in the past company that I used to work for. Lou was talking about how to sell during this time and what he's done. And this is a high-level salesperson that is top of the game. And we had a conversation just so you can see what it's like to be in the shoes of a salesperson that's really in it during this times. Phil Gerbishak, who is Mr. Glasses. Phil is the one who actually put the bug in my idea. Like Steve put the bug in my idea, put the bug in my head about starting my own sales training company. Phil was the one who gave me that same idea to start a podcast. Him and I had a conversation through Sim Central, Florida, where I met him for the first time last year when the pandemic really started. And him and I had a one-on-one. And during that one-on-one coaching training, he was telling me, hey, you should start a podcast. And that's how Leading During Crisis started, and ultimately Selling During Crisis to where we are with the finale. We had on Manny VR. And the reason I had Manny on was because Manny was selling, even though he's not a salesperson. He was selling. He's the CEO of HostDime, And Manny was launching his new, and it just broke ground the other day, as a matter of fact. But Manny was launching and getting ready to release his new data center in Central Florida here in Orlando. He has a bunch of data centers throughout the world, but Orlando was going to be the flagship now. And building that and talking about what that was like from a marketing perspective and selling his services there. So I thought it was really cool to have him on, because even though he's the CEO, he's taking a different approach and different role. Episode 14, we had Jim Eckes, and Jim was the founder of TIE Technology. Jim and I used to work with each other at a company who's no longer around. It's called Bright House. It's now Charter Spectrum. But Jim and I used to work with each other there. He was in Tampa. I was in Orlando. Jim was a top rep, and he had his company here from a telecom perspective. And talking to him about another person that's selling, he's the owner of the company and the co-founder, but also talking about selling and getting his company off the ground and having to deal with everything that was going on during this time. We had Dale Dupree, CEO and co-founder of the Sales Rebellion and the leader of the Sales Rebellion. Dale Dupree is obviously a very big influencer in the sales industry and social media in general. And we had him on to talk about some of the things that he does with his company and with his people, and how he talks about selling during this time. And the last episode we had was with Peter Ekstrom, who's not only a sales trainer, but a professor at Pace University in New York City, talking about sales and the gold caller. I mean, this guy knows how to cold call and sell. So if you want to see that episode, you can take a look at that as well. But that was really what we had on and summarizing the podcast. Now, a lot of the things I learned, I kind of mentioned to you as I was weaving it in, as we were talking about all the different episodes that we had. So overall, what I wanted to do was create a podcast for you salespeople that you can look at as a resource to say, okay, I'm going through it. What are some of the other people doing? How do I leverage LinkedIn? How do I leverage video to communicate? What do I say? What do I do? Am I going down the right path here? I got all this mix of all these different people to kind of come in and give their take and their perspective. Marketing with Jennifer, like I said, how to do all these things, because sales is no longer pick up the phone, make a cold call. It's no longer send out a cold call email. That stuff doesn't work anymore. We have to be creative. We have to level up and make ourselves different. Some of the books that I'm going to recommend to you guys when we talk about leveling up and making us different, I'm going to talk to you about this. I've been reading some of these books. Some of them I've already read. Some of them I'm in the middle of, but I wanted to share this with you. So the first one I'll talk about is The Transparency Sale by Todd Capone. I've read this book twice already. I'm actually in the middle of going through it again. And this is a phenomenal book. So The Transparency Sale, Todd Capone, he was one of the guests on the podcast that you saw before. And this book I've recommended to a bunch of people. It really will tell you how to change the way you look at selling during this time, and how to be transparent during the sale, and why transparency is going to help you close the deal. So you want to pick this up. You can get this on Amazon, The Transparency Sale by Todd Capone. Just a great book. I mean, it was an award-winning book, the best sales book in 2019, a voted best sales book. So definitely pick that up. Here's another book that Phil Gerbishak, who was on the podcast, actually recommended to me, by Art Sobczak. I'm pretty sure I chopped that name up, but it's called Smart Calling: Eliminate the Fear, Failure, and Rejection from Cold Calling. So this is a great book that you want to pick up on Amazon when it comes to cold calling. I found this book very interesting because it talks about some of the old techniques that don't work that we mentioned on this podcast, and some of the new ones as well. And what's recommended, like, for example, what's not recommended is scripting your call, and if you are going to script your call, what's the worst thing that you could do and say, and gives you some options to say at the end, instead of saying this, say that, and then ultimately putting it all together. So really good book when it comes to cold calling. Check this out, Smart Cold Calling by Art. And I'm sorry for chopping up the name, but that's my fault. And then the other thing is, obviously, this is an oldie but a goodie. This book, I'm sure you know, and if you don't know, you might want to get it. Never Split the Difference: Negotiating as if Your Life Depended on It by Voss. Want to pick this book up. This is a phenomenal book by a former FBI hostage negotiator. And he talks about like why we don't want to use the word why in our vocabulary, because why is confrontational. Because remember when you were a kid growing up and your parents said, well, why did you do that? We're trained to know that why is kind of a confrontational thing. And it brings us back subconsciously to that level of when we were being a bad kid. So we don't want to use the word why. There's some alternatives that you can use there, and emphasizing the importance of emotional intelligence. This is a really good book. So, I'm sure you guys have read this or heard of this one before, but if you never picked it up, this is going to help you when you're sitting across the table from that high level C-level executive and you're negotiating the contract. This is the book you're going to want to leverage to help you get that deal done. And the last book I want to recommend, which is awesome to me, is Storytelling Made Easy by Michael Hague. Michael Hague is a Hollywood story expert. He's written a lot of Hollywood story scripts, and he gives you the formula to how to persuade your clients and buyers and clients, by using storytelling. And not only persuading, but also I use this book and I think about this book, because this guy wrote Hollywood stories, right? And when we post on LinkedIn, when we talk about getting an online presence and we talk about being more, how do we get more engagement on our post? Well, the captions and what you write, you have to tell a story. You can't just write, check this out or look at this, because you haven't created enough value to the person that's watching that post to want to scroll down and watch your video or read your post. Why should they continue? And why should they continue to scroll down? And how does this post add value to me? And they're just scrolling. How do you get them to stop? Well, it's by telling a story. And in those captions, in those characters that you have to learn how to tell a story quick to hook the person in and be able to get them to watch what you're putting out there. He talks about using things like in his book, talking about a pattern interrupt. So for example, one of the big posts that I've had in the past on LinkedIn is a post where I wrote, I have an emotional or inspirational video that's on there by Pitbull, the Mr. 305, the artist there. And he talks about, it's a motivational type of video, but the way I got you to watch the video is the very first line in that post. I wrote November 17th or whatever the day was. I can't remember. Let's say November 17th, 2020, I got fired. That's my hook, right? That's like, oh, what is he talking about here? And you want to continue to read on. I got that from this book, Storytelling Made Easy. So you definitely want to read through this. It's a very easy book to read through. It's not that long, but it talks about how to, dialogue, how to pique curiosity. So really good book. So those are my recommendations for you guys that are out there right now that are watching this or going to watch this later on as a previously recorded episode, to get your hands on and read to help you guys in your social selling, in your selling techniques, in your posting, in your online presence, brand building, and things like that. So again, I just wanted to thank you guys for watching, for commenting. During the podcast, we had a lot of people jump on the lives and ask questions to our guests that we had on. So there was that live interaction that was really, really cool. I was able to post your comments on. So thank you to everyone that was watching and following. Hopefully it added some value. And again, big shout out and thank you to everyone that we had on the show. I mean, these people took time out of their busy days and their busy schedules to hop on this video with me and be able to broadcast that out to my entire network for everyone to watch and see. And they gave that information for free. And these people were dropping dimes and nuggets that were amazing. Josh Feedy, if you're watching this, my favorite line is dropping nuggets, more nuggets than McDonald's. And I think everyone that we had on the show dropped a ton of nuggets, more nuggets than McDonald's could ever drop when it came to a selling perspective. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'm really excited that you hopped on. It was a pleasure to bring this to you. And it also, from a selfish perspective, it helped me out a lot tremendously too. Because like I said, I was going through a tough time personally. And even though I knew all this stuff and I was able to, well, for the most part, I knew most of it. Then there was some things that I've learned on the call, on the meeting, on the episode. But for the most part, I kind of knew like social selling, how to build my brand on LinkedIn. I was posting a lot. I was using a lot of video to communicate. And even before the podcast, I was using video to get some high quality appointments that were working out for me. So even before I became a sales trainer, I was doing the stuff that I'm teaching now. But a lot of the things that were said during the podcast from a sales perspective, I think just shed a lot of light on how we're changing and how the world is changing and how it's going to continue to change and become during, even after this is all over, because whether you agree with it or not, it's irrelevant. The world has changed. And now that masks have come off and we're getting back, we're going to be back to face. I still think that there's going to be a component where the first initial meeting is going to be done over Zoom or done over, Teams or WebEx or whatever it is that you use. And if you don't know how to sell over this laptop, if you don't know how to sell over a Zoom link, then you're not going to get the second meeting, which is when they're going to say, okay, you've earned the right for me to invite you to my office and meet face to face. Before, we would call, set up the meeting, and go straight to the office, not knowing each other, not knowing if this was really going to work out. I think now a lot of IT professionals or buyers in general, whether you're in IT or whether your prospect sits in the marketing department or whatever department they sit in, the CFO, they're going to say, before I invite you to my office, let's set up a quick 15, 20-minute Zoom. Let's make sure that there's synergies. And then after that, if it makes sense, the tech or whatever it is that you're selling, then we can have a face-to-face. And if you don't know how to sell over this microphone or over this laptop or over that webcam, then you're going to struggle. And so now that we're on the other side of this now, we're no longer selling during crisis. We're just going back to selling. It's not going to be the same type of selling it was prior to March 2020. It's going to be a little bit different, and you're going to have to stand out and be different. How do you stand out and be different? A lot of the techniques that we talked about on this podcast are going to give you those clues. Using LinkedIn, optimizing your profile and building your brand. Making sure that they engage with you, posting, creating content that people want to see. Like this video right now, this podcast finale is content that I can chop up later on and share with someone. Something that I think would be awesome for a salesperson to see. So this is content that you're creating. And then ultimately using video to communicate with your prospects and letting them know, hey, this is who I am. They can't check the tone of your voice or the excitement in your voice over an email. And there's so many emails out there. How do you separate yourself? So using video to communicate, so you can humanize your communications. You can personalize it for that individual person. That makes them want to meet with you and talk to you. So as a matter of fact, I'll end the podcast with this, and I'll end the series with this by saying these are some of the things that I teach in my sales training. At the very bottom of this in the comments section, I will post a link. I have a free Facebook community that I created back in January where we talk about these topics in detail. So a lot of the content that is in that Facebook group that I put out, I don't put out other places. And the reason I don't put it out is because I'm connected on LinkedIn, let's say, for example, and on YouTube, I'm connected to a lot of people who are not in sales. They could be IT, for example, and they don't necessarily care about this content about selling and sales techniques and all that good stuff. Plus, secret, we don't want to let them know our tricks, right? So that content I don't put out on LinkedIn. I keep that content only for the Facebook group. And I have all the sales pros and the people that want to learn how to build their online brand and presence. I put that stuff into that Facebook group. So if you guys are interested interested in seeing that content, you can join. It's a free private group, but you have to, I have to let you in there, and my admin has to let you in. So want to make sure that you're in sales first of all, because that's the people that is going to benefit the most. So I'll put the link to that group at the bottom in the comment section. Feel free to take a look at it. As a matter of fact, let me show you right now. If you guys give me a second, I'll actually pull it up for you so you can see what it looks like and just get a sense and a feel. Some of you that are watching this probably are going to see, be familiar with it, but I definitely want to show you as well here. So you'll see, let me just share my screen so you can actually see what it looks like, because I think it'll be awesome from that to actually see it. So you can see here, here's our group, High Quality Appointments Mastery. There's a bunch of different things there that we have. There's a bunch of topics in the group. You can see some of the topics that we have that talk about video prospecting messages, 6 things you don't need to get more appointments, optimizing your profile, sales navigator, the different components of your LinkedIn profile. So there's a bunch of different things that we have here in group topics. Take a look at it. So I'll put the link to this group, High Quality Appointments Mastery, in the comment section below. Feel free to join that group for anyone that's there. And for those, one of the questions is, how did you find out about this group? Just say that we saw Jonathan's podcast, the series finale of Selling During Crisis finale, and that's how you found out about the group. So I know that it came from here, and I'll be able to let you guys in. So really excited to be with you guys. Thank you again. Thank you to all our guests, everyone who jumped on the podcast, all those people that I mentioned. Thank you for adding the value. Pick up a copy of those books that I mentioned that are going to help you guys sell during this time. And as always, if there's anything that I can do for you, if we're connected on LinkedIn, if we're not connected, feel free to connect with me first of all. But if we are connected, shoot me a message. Let me know how I can help. For those of you who are watching this, you know that if you've reached out to me in the past, I'll do my best to get you the answer. And if I don't know the answer, I will find a way to get you the answer. So hopefully this added some value to you guys. Go out there, sell something. Happy selling to everyone. And thank you once again to everyone for being a part of this journey with me, selling during crisis. We'll see you the next time we come up with an idea on a podcast, but it won't be selling during crisis, but we'll see you on the next time on LinkedIn Live. Happy selling, everyone. Take care and God bless.